Product managers know they need to align their work with their organization's strategy. Often, it's not clear how to actually accomplish this. We need a strategic framework that can transform how your organization innovates to support strategic objectives. Hoshin Connery, and my guest will hopefully do a better job pronouncing that for us, it is such a framework. It comes from a Japanese phrase. And it's a framework that has worked for organizations, including helping Toyota launch Lexus, which was one of the most successful automotive innovations in history. By the end of this conversation, you'll understand specific frameworks and tools like Catchball for connecting your work to the organization's strategy. Our guest is Mark Reich. He's the senior coach at Lean Enterprise Institute and author of the new book, Managing on Purpose. Mark spent 23 years at Toyota, including 6 years in Japan working directly with chief engineers during the Lexus launch. He then managed Toyota's North American strategic planning process during a period where the company nearly doubled in size. For over a decade, he's coached executives at companies like GE Appliances, Turner Construction, and Nuclear Software, among others, on implementing Hoshin Kanri for breakthrough results. If anyone can show you how to turn strategic planning into an innovation engine, it's Mark. Also, if you're listening and you would rather watch the video version of our discussion, go to our YouTube channel, search for Product Mastery Now on YouTube. Let's jump in right after this.
How can you unlock your full potential as a product manager? We're sharing the product management insights you need. They are based on the 7 research-backed knowledge areas for product mastery. You'll learn to create products customers love, enhance your influence, and elevate your career. Welcome to Product Mastery Now, hosted by Dr. Chad McAllister, product management professor, practitioner, and your guide.
Mark, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Chad. It's great to be here.
We should clear one thing up. This framework that you have learned from all that work at Toyota, how do you pronounce it properly?
Hoshin Kanri.
Hoshin Connery. Thank you. I'll probably get it wrong again. Hoshin Connery. At that time at Lexus, I thought that might be a good place to start. When you were at Toyota, decided to do the Lexus brand, all the innovation that was involved in that, that really was a breakthrough in the automotive industry. How did Hoshin Connery specifically enable that innovation?
Well, thank you for asking that question. Just to give a little bit, maybe clarity, of where it wasn't like I was in charge of all that. I had just joined Toyota in 1988. Toyota launched the Lexus brand in 1989. I happened to be, the group that I joined was a group called the Overseas Planning Division, just to give your listeners a little bit of perspective. What that group had responsibility for was defining for all of our overseas markets what our products would be. And in terms of specification, pricing, and supply. Like, as an example, we sold Corolla in close to 100 countries. You can't make 100 different kinds of Corolla. You've got to define what specific requirements are needed for regions. Like the Middle East, obviously the requirements are much different from a place like Europe. And so our responsibility was really to work with the chief engineers on one side to help define specifications from the product, but then also work with all our distributors on the other side around the world to bring them together, so to speak. And so that was our role. I happened to join in 88, as I said. Lexus was launched in 89, so obviously that project was already full steam in the pipeline. But you asked specifically about how Hoshin Kanri kind of helped that process. So Hoshin Kanri, it's explained in my book. It's a management methodology to define what your strategic objectives will be for the organization, and then to define a structure and methodology to engage the people and execute on those objectives. So clearly, as you just mentioned, I mean, the Lexus, particularly for Toyota, was really a big step in terms of our progress as an automaker. We had the luxury automotive market existed before Lexus came along. Obviously, Mercedes, BMW from Germany sold luxury cars. In the US, Cadillac sold luxury cars, but Toyota recognized a space kind of in the middle, where between the price points of the Germans and the US, where potentially the Japanese could enter. And but Toyota up until that time was known as a pretty much a company that made really good small cars that just never broke down. Cars like the Corolla or the recently
Right.
before that introduced Camry. So the Lexus was a really big step, and it required kind of an organization-wide initiative, meaning we had to think about not only what the car would be about, which is what our product development and our chief engineer had responsibility for, but we had to think about how to price it in terms of our planning. We had to think about from a marketing side. It was a completely new marketing challenge for Toyota based on what I just said. Toyota was not known as a luxury car maker at all. So we decided, particularly in the US and Canada, to set up a whole new network of dealers that would handle Lexus. So you can see that it's really an initiative that spanned the whole organization. So in that sense, Hoshin Kanri supported that, and Toyota's methodology do that very well. We had to define a strategy across the organization that we would align on in terms of how we would develop and launch that product, and when we would do it, what was the price point, and build alignment around those kind of key points for the model. And so that's an excellent way how Hoshin Kanri can function. It builds kind of alignment to a few important core initiatives for an organization across the organization, and organizations can often be siloed. So building alignment among product development, we had to make the Lexus, obviously, production, we had to market and sell it, so marketing and sales, and this was a global product, so that meant global marketing and sales. And all of that was helped by the use of and definition of Hoshin Kanri and using Hoshin Kanri for that purpose.
I'm pretty sure there's some product leaders, product VPs, CPOs that are listening that probably their ears perked up a little bit just on that word alignment, because this is unfortunately a key issue for many organizations, trying to achieve alignment, not going in different directions. Sometimes those silos are actually working at odds with each other because we don't have clear alignment. This is a opportunity for improvements, and this is a framework for helping with that. And when it comes to product innovation, I view, and we have good research to support this, our product innovation efforts should be aligned with our strategic objectives as an organization. So this framework helps us with that as well. We'll get into some details pretty soon. But sometimes when we think about strategy and alignment, there's this perception that this is a top-down, driven from the top down into the organization activity that takes place in an organization. I don't think that's necessarily true, and I also think this framework helps us with that. Can you address that?
Sure. I'm glad you brought that up. That's one of my favorite topics to talk about. I look at, and it's kind of the picture, if you look in the back, if for those of you that are watching the video, kind of shown on my behind me there. But a really important part of Hoshin Kanri, and I think innovation itself, is that it's both top down and bottom up. And the organization, of course, it's the responsibility of leadership in an organization to define what the direction where the direction of the organization should go, and the decision to make, just the example we were talking about, the decision that Toyota would enter the luxury car market with the brand of Lexus. Obviously, that's a decision that top leaders have to discuss. There's a lot of investment required, a lot of money required for something like that to be done. And however, on the other hand, there's a whole lot of learning and know-how that exists on the front line, whether it's relates, for example, to the example I was talking about related to Lexus, in that Toyota had a good reputation in the US and Japan for reliability, but it was reliability around small cars and reliability around durability of their vehicles. And so that type of knowledge is important to understand from the bottom up, meaning understanding why do customers perceive us that way. Of course, some of that we might know just from this type of products we already sell. However, what Toyota and chief engineers in Toyota make a big effort to do, and I would say leaders in Toyota, I don't want to limit it to chief engineer, leaders in Toyota and good companies that do lean go to the front line and understand what the issues are related to the work. And so one of the things that chief engineers make a big effort to do into it is to go out in the field and understand why customers buy what they do and what they're looking for from a company like Toyota. So it is definitely top down and bottom up. It means ideas and innovation in reality often come from bottom up. It's not from a bunch of executives sitting in a conference room brainstorming.
Yeah.
It's from what's perceived in the field. Now, some of that may be leaders who are brilliant and innovative that can go in the field and understand that, but mostly it's from understanding practically what problems are being encountered in the organization and how, or in the market even, like what are the issues in the market that are presented that potentially an organization could address with new thinking.
Excellent. So this approach back to alignment, aligning an organization around a more customer-centered perspective. As organizations grow, I'm actually delighted to hear Toyota does make an effort to be out with customers, right? Learning about what customers want, why they're buying, why they're not buying. As many organizations grow, we see our senior leaders getting more distant from customers. And that frontline employee environment is really important, right? To have those frontline employees that are having contact with customers, providing information back to leadership about what they're learning. And this is a good way to align on the future of our work, which is what does the customer want? What are their unmet needs? What's the problem they're trying to solve, right? That they're not getting done right now. Any more thoughts on that customer-centered approach for creating alignment?
Well, I would say let me speak a little bit about that. Let me speak a moment about this alignment word. In my book, I talk a lot about there's two elements that are important. There's a vertical alignment and horizontal alignment. So I think what we're speaking now to, Chad, really is around vertical alignment. And that means that the leadership in the organization and down through managers and frontline staff who are doing like value creating work, there has to be alignment in that level. And that type of vertical alignment has many purposes. But one is, as we were just talking about, for leaders obviously they can't make contact with every single customer. If you're a top leader in an organization, hopefully you're getting out and you're seeing what customers perceive and you're interacting with some customers, but that's going to be limited based on your scope of responsibility. But that's why we have people in the organization who interact with customers all the time. Or interact, and I would say not just limiting it to the customer, but also any kind of frontline work, whether it's the building of the car or the development of the vehicle. When you do that type of work, whether interacting with, you're going to encounter a lot of problems day to day. And getting the voice of those people is a power Hoshin Connery can provide. But that has to start with, one, the leaders have to be out listening. But in the process of developing your strategy, you can build a mechanism, and I introduce it in the book, on how to pull that thinking from people. So it's not just this esoteric strategy session that happens in a conference room with a bunch of leadership. There's input from the bottom. It starts with input from the bottom. And then once a strategy kind of gets defined, once the Hoshin for the organization gets defined, it's also engaging them in helping to support and execute on that, because that motivates people. If I can know as let's just say a frontline engineer, how I contribute to the organization's overall objectives, I feel probably pretty motivated by that. People come to work. We spend a third of our lives working, at least, probably many people. So knowing that I'm making a real contribution to the workplace where I come, as opposed to I have just some administrative job off in a corner, I think has a lot of meaning for people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, being able to see action taken on that input from people that are closest to the customer.
Yeah, one other point about the customer too. I mean, just a final point. When you're in that frontline work, and if you're that individual who's dealing day to day with the customer, whether you're like in Toyota's case, a dealer, a salesman, you hear the raw voice. And that's frustrating. That can be frustrating if the customers aren't happy with the product they get, with the process of getting the product to them, whatever that might be. If they're not happy, it's the frontline person who has to suffer through that.
Right.
And so they know better than anybody what the issues are. And so getting down and understanding what those challenges are is critical.
Yeah, and we have to way to catch them inside the organization, right? It's frontline employees know these things, and unfortunately, in some organizations, they also know no one cares to hear it, right? And we need a mechanism for dealing with that and frameworks for
That's
that.
another conversation about culture. So
Yes, it is. But this is a framework that can help us develop that culture that we want, that
yeah.
is more customer focused and aligned. Let's get into the specific mechanics. Maybe think about a product leader of an organization that's listening to this and going, okay, we have some alignment issues. I know I want to get our product innovation work better aligned to our strategic objectives as well. How do we help this product leader know where to start on this framework, which is a difficult phrase for me to pronounce,
Hoshin Kanri.
but I'm learning. Hoshin Kanri.
Very
What do we tell that person to do?
well. This is a management system designed for the organization to function across the organization, and that means it does to some extent. The corporate direction starts from the top. I mean, it starts from, and I say from the top, but it's really from the like what is the company direction, what is the a competitive environment that the company is in, where is that direct where the what's the direction of the market going. I mean, a perfect example is the automotive industry now. I mean, it's talk about an industry that's in a huge flux. Is it going to be an electric industry? Is it going to be like a driverless industry? I mean, there's an industry there. You have to figure out like what direction the organization has to go. But I think once you've defined those like objectives that you feel are important for the direction of the organization to go, those can be broken down into the organization. And one of the examples from my book, the book Managing on Purpose, is it's a practical workbook for people to use to to try Hoshin Kanri, but it includes a case study. And the case study is of an organization that makes lawnmowers. It's fictitious. It's an amalgamation of organizations that I worked with, but they make lawnmowers, and the lawnmower industry is moving to electric, kind of like the car industry. And but this company is struggling to get an electric product out. So their primary objective for the year is to launch an electric mower. Well, of course, they can't just saying we should launch an electric mower isn't enough. So to your question, at the top level, that may be the objective. But leaders like the vice president of product development or a manager in product development eventually, you can take that high level objective and break it down to your level. That's the part of the mechanics and the mechanism that's introduced in the book. How do you take a high level objective like launching electric mowers from the top level of a corporate objective to define what is your responsibility to help do that? Well, it turns out in the case study, a big issue is the prototype has been developed, but they can't get it to production. So there's a very concrete issue. I mean, there's a concrete problem to solve that product development can work on with production, of course, to try to get that prototype into a mass production situation. And you can imagine like that's almost like a vice president level, like a functional level responsibility. But there's going to be manager and frontline people that are going to have to implement and try things in the organization to help accomplish that. And that's where things can connect effectively.
Okay. So being able to start at that high level, right, the objectives. And a lot of times when we're doing strategy development in an organization, we have business sounding objectives, right? Like we're going to move into this new market and establish a foothold there. We're going to take our existing product lines and grow our primary line by 10% a year, something like that. And we need to translate that into what I would say more customer-centric actions that we can take, right? How do we actually entice a customer in a new market to want to buy our products, right? Something we can take action on. And you're talking about moving from that high level objective into things we're taking specific actions on. What are some more details about how this framework helps us to accomplish that? Like your example, the engineering work has been done apparently. We came up with some solutions. We've narrowed that down. We got a prototype. Now we have the challenge of doing this at scale.
Well, I would say it's a great question. In the book, we lay out the process and the content of the development of this Hoshin for the True Mowers company. And within that construct, the leadership team comes up with 5 objectives. One of those objectives the one we just talked about is launch an electric mower with innovative features to meet customer needs. So it speaks directly to meeting the customer requirement or the expectation of the market is moving, and we want to move into electric market. So that type of objective, we define within that objective then what are some key activities that we can do to support that. We want to make this very practical. It's not just this pie in the sky, make an electric mower. And in the book, we introduced there's like 4 key activities that the organization can do to transition, or excuse me, to execute on that objective. And then those activities they're still fairly high level. They can be broken down to the next level. In the book, refer to it as departmental level. Different organizations are organized a little bit differently, but let's just say the next tier in the organization, which is you have the company level, then you have like a functional or departmental level. They can develop their own Hoshin, which actually takes that high level, launch the electric mower down to things like, well, we want to get the mower visible in more trade shows so people are aware that the company's name in the book is True Mowers. So they're aware that True Mowers is on the verge of launching a new product. Those types of that what we call Hoshin breakdown, that breakdown from a high level objective and activity to a next level objective and activity, all the way down to individual problem solving, is part of the structure of Hoshin Connery that I think helps. Back to the point we were talking about earlier, this vertical alignment. It helps doing that helps to people to understand why we're doing this and how that connects directly to their work.
Yeah, and that's what we need to see. It would probably help us to know what a Hoshin is. I know these are 2 separate words, but we're using Hoshin as sounds like an important document that lays out objectives and actions at multiple levels.
That's right. So maybe it'd be good, Hoshin Connery, we've been using that term this whole podcast, but just to translate that, I mean, Hoshin is typically has a couple meanings in this world. I mean, it's basically kind of the direction of the organization and like the organization is going. Like the literal translation in Japanese is like the compass needle, like the direction the organization is going. And but it's often we refer to as the document itself that's created as Hoshin Kanri. Kanri is refers to like a management. So it's kind of the management of that direction that we've decided. So it's more than just, and many organizations, they define the direction, but then don't put in place good structure up and down the organization and across the organization to execute on it. And that's where the Connery, the management part of that comes into play.
Yeah. This is really important. Often, this is an example of triggering this thought that comes back to me sitting on the executive team of a startup many years ago, where a high-level objective was given by the CEO to all the VPs. And then in my role, I had the opportunity to work across the VPs and felt the tension of things moving in opposite directions, and saw out of this particular session the VPs of the functions actually working at odds at each other, not knowing it. They were trying to deliver on the objective of the CEO, but executing in a way that we clearly had alignment issues, right? And this is the problem we're trying to get to. And I really like the mower example in terms of, I just felt a little excitement as you were talking about that. Like we could actually have everyone on the same page, right? Working together to accomplish this objective that's been set in a meaningful and tangible way.
Yes, and I'm glad. So what you brought up just now, we talked a lot about vertical alignment. What you brought up just now is horizontal alignment, which is a whole different kind of point in the book and point in Hoshin Kanri. I mean, typically organizations at the corporate level define. I mean, this is a company direction. You're defining the company direction. So the objectives or the goals, the things that are going to come out of that are going to be company level. They're not going to be functional level. And so as you break those down, it becomes difficult to translate those. So like you said, the scenario you're in where things get siloed. What's required, and that sometimes organizations just don't understand, is that you need a mechanism. You need a practical methodology mechanism to make that work. And the mechanism, and Hoshin Kanri provides that mechanism, which is a structured way to bring those leaders together define, and for most organizations, I say, look, you need to think about 3 to 5 things. I worked with a lot of, you mentioned some of the companies I worked with, big companies. They're trying to do 40 or 50 things in the organization. Pick 3 to 5. What are the 3 to 5 priorities for the company? And focus on those. And then if you can get that clarity, then you can define like, okay, well, in order to do that, in order to, like the example from the book, launching the electric mower, in order to do that, what do we have to do? But not only what do we have to do, who's going to be the leader of that? And I want a name. I don't just want like some broad like function, or I don't want 5 different people. Who is the leader? And then what's the support required from the rest of the organization? So in the case of the launching the electric mower example, the product development vice president kind of naturally was the lead on that. But that person can't launch the vehicle by herself. You can't do that without involving production.
Right.
So we need to define, okay, from production, what specific support is required? What do we need production to do by when? And the organization needs to build alignment of that, and resources have to be like put forth for that purpose. But what I'm describing is laid out in the book, and in Toyota, where I learned this, and with other organizations that I've tried this, I mean, that becomes a very like structured, practical exercise to define what is it we're going to do, who do I need support from to do, who's the lead, and who I need support from to do that, and then like what is their role, what specifically support are they going to provide.
Okay. Yeah, because we want to be able to take actual action and have that alignment. And sometimes we see launching the new mower, right? We're first probably doing the customer research, market research to understand where the opportunity is in the marketplace, where's a hole that we can play. We're figuring out what the product should be. And there's handoffs along the way, right? The prototype gets done. We send that off to pre-production, to manufacturing. They do their thing. Marketing gets involved late. Sales is involved. There's pricing discussions, right? And instead, this sounds like an approach where we're creating up front the support people that need to be part of this project to move together so we have a successful launch at the end.
Yeah, and you described it perfectly, but the important point there is the first point, which is, as an organization, all those functions you just talked about, sit in a room and agree, this is one of the 5 priorities. Right. This year, we're going to launch an electric mower. We've struggled to do it. That's a priority. There's not going to be 40 other priorities. And so now, look, I've working in Toyota, it was true. I've worked with many organizations. You get that alignment, you get into the actual execution, and things don't go as planned. So there are situations, of course, where the CEO or leadership has to step in and say, hey, you guys need to work together. And there needs to become, like, you need to reconcile this issue. Or where maybe because as you lay out, you can say, I'll support you, but then as you lay out a practical plan, that may become difficult based on the resources that are provided or the capabilities. So those things hopefully leaders can work together to accomplish objectives, but sometimes the top has to step in to try to help guide the ship too.
Sure. Yeah. Set the overall priorities, focusing on a few that we can actually get done in a timely fashion that will make a difference to the organization. So, okay. One concept, and as listeners know, I tend to not read books of guests when they have a book because it makes me more curious. But you do have this concept called Catchball that I came across, and there's a vertical and a horizontal version of the Catchball, probably related to the alignment things we've been talking about. How is this an important tool for us?
Well, it's a really important tool, but they're very different. And I alluded, and I talked a little bit about that when we were in the alignment portion of the discussion. But let's just be clear: the vertical Catchball is about developing and engaging the organization, meaning that, and again, I'll continue to use this example because I think it's a thread for the conversation. If we're developing that electric mower, as we do in the case in the book, and that has to be broken down, and the next level has to think about, okay, what am I going to do as a product manager, for example, to ensure we get this prototype completed? That type of Catchball is very structured in Toyota. It's very structured in the approach I explain in my book. Is I'm going to give you a kind of a challenge to try to think about that, And I want you to come back with a proposal with an idea of how you're going to execute on that, and I'll coach you through that process. So it's a structured learning process. And that's when one of the things that's really important, I'm going to use this time in our podcast to talk about this, but one of the things that is really important in the book that I emphasize is developing capability. I go around to organizations, people never talk about developing capability when they talk about strategy. That was a primary focus for Toyota and what I learned, and they're using Hoshin Kanri. And so that idea of I can kind of throw the ball to you, Chad, who is maybe the product manager, and you're going to come up with your idea and you're going to come back and propose that to me. I'm not going to tell you exactly what to do. And then I may coach you on that. I may feel you need to adjust your thinking. That type of catchball back and forth should happen at each tier in the organization. That's vertical catchball. So it's a developmental purpose. But it's also an engagement purpose because you're getting the person to own their part of the problem, their part of the objective for the company. The horizontal objective is primarily building consensus across the organization for the direction of where you want to go, and ensuring that the support and resources are provided for the objectives to be achieved. Now, there is one more kind of developmental objective for the leaders. I mentioned to you that it's really important there be one leader, because in Toyota we looked at Hoshin. If you were a lead person on a Hoshin, that was an like a Hoshin objective, like launching an electric mower. That's an opportunity for your development, because you're put in a position then where you have to lead without, in many cases, lead without authority. So the product development vice president we just talked about, she has responsibility to get that mower launched. Well, she can't accomplish that just by developing the mower. It has to be produced. It has to be, like you talked about, it has to be marketed. So how she engages others in the organization is an opportunity for learning and development. And in Toyota, we evaluated that. We looked at how well do leaders work across the organization. And so to that point, they have to be incentivized that way too. If a leader is only incentivized by some metric that is isolated within their job, within their function, they're going to perform to that metric because that's how they get paid. So the organization has to acknowledge and recognize that we want to support and promote people who are capable to lead across the organization.
Excellent. Okay, so catchball, important concept there as well. We're certainly just scratching the surface of this, but your workbook is also very accessible. It's not an enormously long workbook to figure these things out, and we'll have details about how to put a catchball in place, how to write a Hoshin, get alignment across, and I think you really outlined the key pieces of this, which is we need focus, we need the organization committed on a few high-level objectives, and then what does that mean for everyone supporting that to take action, and what has to happen, creating that alignment, overusing the word, but creating that alignment between what's going on. That's really good. Okay, I appreciate the information. I am going to ask you for an innovation quote in just a moment. Before I get there, you certainly have had lots of training and education along the way. I have as well. One of the things I really benefited from was learning these 7 knowledge elements for a professional product manager. And the organization that introduced me to those is the PDMA, the Product Development and Management Association. And when I learned those, I had all these great aha moments that really made a difference to me. I had been doing product work for 10 years, and I figured out I had missed some important relationships that this added clarity to. And I've been helping others learn this knowledge since then. Created a system to make that easy. That's called the RPM experience, the Rapid Product Mastery Experience. And if you already are a product manager, product leader, and you really are committed to the profession, there's probably some blind spots you have. And these 7 areas, things like strategy development and process development and team development and more, are things that you need to have under your belt. If you want to find out about how to do that, how to learn these areas using my system, simply go to productmasterynow.com and you'll find out about the RPM experience. Mark, help to educate us further by sharing an innovation quote with us and what that means to you.
Okay. It probably won't come as a surprise to any of your listeners, since it's been the thread of the conversation today. But I have a quote from a book from a gentleman I really like. Named author is Matt Ridley. It's about how innovation works, and his quote is, "Innovation is a bottom-up phenomenon," and I think that's really true. And I'll share a concrete example, like from a totally different industry. We've been talking a fair amount about the manufacturing industry, lawnmowers and cars, but in the restaurant industry, in the hospitality industry, I spent some time working with an organization, a pretty well-known restaurant chain in the Northeast, kind of a high-end restaurant, and we implemented lean thinking and
Was
practice.
this legal seafood?
Uh, I'm not going to say the name, but
I'm just thinking of well-known ones I know in the Northeast that I've eaten at.
pretty,
Okay,
pretty good
go
guess.
ahead.
But in that organization, we looked at what's the frontline work of the chefs. And we found that there was a huge amount of like waste in that work. And you want chefs, I mean, it's probably for a high-end restaurant, the chef is probably the most important like person in the restaurant. I mean, you go there because for the flavor of the food. And so the chef, but we found that for a good part of the chef's work was like running around doing work that wasn't necessary for that person to do. And in the course of redesigning all that work, we ended up redesigning the entire kitchen of the restaurant. And when we redesigned the kitchen, the layout actually changed and shrunk significantly to make it easier for the chef's work. And when that layout shrunk significantly, and they were doing layout changes and remodeling some of their restaurants, it opened up an entire new space in the restaurant that allowed them to put in a new concept that was coming in to the north, like coming into the restaurant, this fast and fresh, like concept of like poke bowls and like those type of things. So they opened up a whole new business line without any additional capital investment or very little capital investment, because they had the ability to open up that space. And that would have never come if we hadn't really studied the work of the chefs in the restaurant, the frontline work. And so I'm a big believer, and it comes out in my book too, that innovation is the bottom-up phenomenon.
Yeah, we have to have support of senior leaders, clearly,
Yep.
because they are the ones setting the objectives, but
That's right.
absolutely.
Absolutely.
And those frontline employees, there's two really valuable things I think that anyone in the organization can do, but particularly the frontline employees, is one, stop the stupid things, right? When we see things that are inefficient and not working well, call those out. And then bring that voice of the customer, our insights about the customer, to the organization as well.
Yes.
I like that quote. Thank you for sharing that. I love new quotes. That's a new one to me as well. So how can people find out more about you, the work you're doing, where to look at your book, those things?
So they can find my book at lean.org/MOP, Managing on Purpose, MOP. So and I would say one important thing just to note for your listeners is go to lean.org. We are a nonprofit institute established in 1997. We've been around 26 years, and we've accumulated like a lot of know-how in our organization that's free for learning. And so if you're interested in any aspect of what we talked about today, I mean, my book, obviously, if you want to buy it, I'd love that. That's not free, but there's plenty of good know-how and learning you can find on that website too.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a fundamental aspect of good product management, good product innovation. There's many things that have come from the lean perspective. We see aspects of that in what we might know better as lean startup from Eric Ries. But this Toyota production system, TPS, started all of that doing work. And the lean concepts are important for us to be aware of. So appreciate you making that available, the work that organization has done and you've done over the years at lean.org. Numerous resources there to find out about. Great. Mark, thank you so much. I'm going to put those links in the show notes. We really appreciate having this information about this framework for really aligning innovation with our strategic objectives and how that can happen throughout the organization. Appreciate you being with us.
Thank you very much, Chad. It was wonderful to be on.
It was a good discussion. And listeners, if you want to find a written version of what we discussed, go to productmasterynow.com/547. We're changing up how we do show notes. We've experimented well, not experimented at this point, but for many years had the short version. We went to a long article version. Now we're kind of back in between. But one thing that has stayed consistent for the last several years is we do add discussion questions. I have contacts from groups at times and companies that say, hey, this was something that we've wanted to talk about as an organization. I've asked everyone to listen to this episode, and then we're going to have a brown bag discussion about it. Those discussion questions can help you with that. So use that resource that's made available to you. So again, just go to productmasterynow.com/547. As always, everyone, keep innovating.
Thank you for listening to Product Mastery Now, where product leaders and managers gain product mastery through practical knowledge, influence, and confidence. By listening, you are becoming a product master, creating products customers love. Find additional resources at productmasterynow.com. Keep innovating.